After a 35-day-long partial government shutdown, United States President Donald Trump has agreed to end the shutdown temporarily amid mounting pressure to end the impasse. Trump has agreed to open the government until February 15th, but has warned of renewed hostility or a state emergency if there is no progress on his $5.7 billion border wall funding. Embattled Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has said that his government would defeat a coup, referring to opposition leader Juan Guaido and the efforts to recognize him as interim president. Guaido has declared himself interim as president, winning support from the United States and most Latin American countries. Maduro, who has led the oil-rich nation since 2013 and was re-elected last year in an election largely seen as a sham, severed diplomatic ties with Washington earlier this week. Venezuelan opposition leader Juan Guaido has hinted that he may consider granting amnesty to President Nicolas Maduro and his allies if they help return Venezuela to democracy. Asked if he would offer an amnesty to Maduro, he replied, "That would have to be looked at." He said an amnesty was on the table for anybody willing to help return the Latin American nation to constitutional order. Some of the U.S. diplomats were seen leaving the embassy in Caracas for the airport in a convoy escorted by police. This after Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro broke off relations with Washington and ordered American personnel out. The United States became one of the first countries to recognize 35-year-old Juan Guaido's claim to power. Guaido, who heads Venezuela's National Assembly, has galvanized the country's opposition, but he still has no control over the state's functions, which remain loyal to Maduro. Washington-backed Venezuelan opposition leader Juan Guaido has said that American diplomats can stay in Caracas. Surrounded by thousands of his supporters, Guaido also urged Venezuelan consular staff in the U.S. to stay in defiance of President Nicolas Maduro's order of ending all diplomatic missions in the U.S. Maduro on Wednesday gave the U.S. envoys 72 hours to leave the country and close their embassy as he announced he was breaking diplomatic relations over the Trump administration's decision to recognize Guaido as interim president of the oil-rich nation. The United Nations has said that it will dispatch a human rights expert to Turkey over the killing of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. The UN said Agnes Callamard will head an international inquiry starting with a week-long visit to Turkey on Monday. Callamard, an expert on extrajudicial summary or arbitrary killings, will evaluate the circumstances surrounding Khashoggi's murder from a human rights perspective. 59-year-old Jamal Khashoggi, a Washington Post columnist, was killed inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul on October 2nd last year. The United Nations human rights boss Michelle Bachelet has called for an independent investigation into alleged use of force by Venezuelan security forces against anti-government protesters. Bachelet cited a report which said that at least 20 demonstrators have been killed in Venezuela since the country's political crisis began. The United Nations also said that more than 350 people are reported to have been detained in protests since opposition leader Juan Guaido declared himself interim president, challenging President Nicolas Maduro. At least 7 people have been killed and over 200 people are reportedly missing after a dam burst at an iron ore mine in Brazil, released a river of toxic waste that spread to nearby buildings. The country's Environmental Protection Agency has said that the dam held 1 million cubic meters of tailings ore mine dump. Authorities said that leaked tailings from the mine had spread into towns in the region. Residents living near an iron ore mine owned by Brazilian miner Vale have been evacuated after a tailings dam ruptured, pouring out mud into the surrounding area. A dramatic video shows rescue workers in a helicopter pulling people from thick, deep mud. At least 4 people have been killed in a mid-air collision between a helicopter and a light plane above the Italian Alps. Local reports said that the accident took place near the city of Turin. Video filmed by the Italian Alpine Rescue Unit showed the wreckage of what appeared to be a helicopter nestled in snow. It was not immediately clear how the accident happened or who was aboard the 2 aircrafts. A Palestinian man was shot dead in fresh clashes at the Gaza border. 25-year-old Ehab Abed died after being fatally shot in the heart, said a Gaza Health Ministry spokesperson. At least 22 others were also injured during the clashes. Friday's protests at the Israel-Gaza border were the first since the seeming breakdown of an informal truce agreement between Israel and Gaza rulers Hamas. Qatar is set to pay $20 million to boost Gaza's ailing economy. Qatar's humanitarian aid comes a day after the Palestinian rulers stopped the oil-rich Gulf state from paying money directly to impoverished government workers there. Hamas had blocked direct Qatari payments to thousands of unpaid Palestinian civil servants in Gaza, claiming that Israel had broken agreements. The compromise follows a regional standoff that has left civil servants in Gaza caught up in bitter power struggle between Hamas and the Western-backed President Mahmoud Abbas in the West Bank. The Yellow Vest protesters have condemned the use of rubber bullets and tear gas during the protests. Several protesters have been injured in the protest violence, and the police have come under fire over the use of defensive weapons. Photos of protesters suffering gruesome head injuries have circulated on social media, leading to various criticism. But the French Interior Minister has defended the use of rubber bullets but has instructed the riot police to wear body cameras if they have to use projectiles. The sister of missing Cardiff City football player Emiliano Sala paid a tearful visit to a shrine dedicated to the Premier League club outside their ground in Wales. Romina Sala, who had urged rescuers to resume the search for her striker brother, sobbed as she examined a yellow Mantis club shirt placed on the ground. Sala, Cardiff's new signing from Nantes, went missing on Monday when the plane he was travelling in disappeared over the English Channel. Rescuers halted the search operation after finding no traces of the plane. Rescue miners continued searching for a 2-year-old boy who fell into a narrow well in Spain on January 13. A police video showed how the operation entered its riskiest phase when miners went down a parallel shaft to start digging across to the borehole. There have been no signs of life since the toddler fell into the borehole as his family walked through a private estate in Tortolan in Malaga. The search operation hit a snag after rescuers found that the well was blocked with mud, raising fears of soil having collapsed onto the child. The World Health Organization has said that the Democratic Republic of Congo's Ebola outbreak has spread southwards into an area with high security risks. The outbreak, the country's worst, has killed over 400 people. The fight against Ebola depends on tracing people who may have had contact with the disease and could fall ill and spread it further. But the outbreak in a region of Congo with frequent fighting makes it hard for health workers to move around and monitor potential sufferers and to spread messages about how to avoid becoming sick. Senegalese police fired tear gas at students protesting against a new election rule and a constitutional court decision barring some opposition figures from running in presidential election next month. After blocking the streets around the university where the protests were taking place, riot police fired tear gas at students who lobbed stones and threw the tear gas cans back at the TASMANIA. Hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets of the Austrian capital of Vienna in anti-government protests. Demonstrators marched against the right-wing coalition, which came to power in the European nation last year. Zimbabwe continues to be on the boil as a fresh wave of unrest is set to grip the country. The group representing government workers has announced that roughly 500,000 civil servants across the country will go on strike after failed salary negotiations. Last week, the country's capital, Harare, was rattled by massive protests against the government's decision to hike fuel prices. According to rights groups, at least 12 people have been killed in the unrest and more than 300 wounded. For the first time since its liberation from the Islamic State, the Iraqi city of Mosul inaugurated a new archbishop. The city was taken over by the terror group in June 2014, which led to the exodus of its Christian population. The head of St. Paul's Church encouraged Christians to return to their homes in Mosul and to work together to build a common solid ground for tolerance and coexistence in the city. Speaking on the occasion of Catholic World Youth Day in Panama, Pope Francis said that it was senseless and irresponsible to stigmatize migrants and see all of them as threats to society. Speaking to hundreds of Catholic youth at a religious service, the Pope said, "We want to be a church that fosters a culture that welcomes, protects, promotes and integrates, that does not stigmatize, much less indulge in a senseless and irresponsible condemnation of every immigrant as a threat to society." Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg has announced that he plans to unify the underlying messaging infrastructure of WhatsApp, Instagram and Facebook Messenger services and incorporate end-to-end encryption into these apps. American media reported that although Zuckerberg plans to unify the three services, they will continue to be standalone apps. Facebook has said that it is working on expanding its end-to-end encryption feature, which protects messages from being viewed by anyone except the participants in a conversation. In China's Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region, more than 500 athletes gathered for a fierce ice dragon boat race. Boats installed with skate-like blades on the bottom raced on frozen lake waters as hundreds of spectators cheered on. The race was a test event for China's 14th International Winter Games, which will be held in 2020. One of the toughest dog sled races in Europe has kicked off in the Czech Republic. Despite harsh weather conditions and heavy snow, at least 700 dogs from 8 countries have participated in this year's race. The race takes place in the mountain range in the northeastern Czech Republic that forms the border with Poland. During the 5-day race, competitors are expected to cover distances of 200 to 300 kilometers and spend one night sleeping out in the snow. This is the 23rd edition of the competitive event. The US Midwest continues to be gripped by harsh winter conditions. An Arctic freeze has now wrapped several parts of the region. Cold weather advisories were in effect from North Dakota to Ohio, with dangerously cold wind chills that could dip to as low as 45 below zero. The Met Department has predicted that even colder temperatures are expected to hit the region next week. The National Weather Service has said that starting Tuesday, potentially historic cold coupled with several inches of snow is possible in northern Illinois. As soaring temperatures continue to grip Australia, residents of the country's island state of Tasmania faced continuing bushfires. Residents were told to stay out of the bush in the coming days as fires rage across Tasmania. As of yesterday morning, there were 53 fires listed by the fire services, out of which 29 were active fires. Meanwhile, residents in Victoria's capital city, Melbourne, were warned of power outages as the city was set to experience it in a decade. Temperatures in Melbourne are expected to hit a record 44 degrees Celsius in the days to come.